This is one of those moments where the predictions are louder than the games themselves, because ESPN didn't just preview Week 16, they practically declared verdicts, and that's why this has people furious, confused, and glued to their screens, because when analysts start talking like outcomes are inevitable, it stops being analysis and starts feeling like judgment, and that's exactly what happened here when Eagles clinching the NFC East, Ravens crushing the Patriots, and Jaguars stunning the Broncos were framed not as possibilities but as realities waiting to happen. And the tension comes from how brutally honest, dismissive, and revealing the conversation really was. Because beneath the surface, this wasn't about football games, it was about trust, legitimacy, and which teams the football world actually believes in when everything is on the line. The Eagles weren't discussed like a team fighting for identity. They were discussed like a machine that simply needed to decide which gear to use, and that alone should bother people who watched Jalen Hurts throw 4 interceptions 2 weeks ago. Because even when the panel questioned whether the Raiders game meant anything at all, the conclusion quietly stayed the same, that Philadelphia still controls the NFC East and everyone else is reacting to them, not the other way around. That's the controversy right there, because saying you're not buying the turnaround while still assuming the division is locked up is a contradiction that reveals bias, and fans picked up on it immediately. The introduction of this story matters because what exploded across the sports world wasn't just these predictions, it was how confidently they were delivered, how casually flaws were brushed aside, and how quickly struggling teams were reduced to footnotes. Eagles versus Commanders became less about competition and more about whether Jalen Hurts needed another confidence booster, which tells you everything about how lopsided the narrative has become. And if you're watching this channel right now, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button, because this is exactly where we break down what they're really saying, not just what they pretend to analyze. Once you get past the surface, the Eagles discussion exposes a deeper truth about how contenders are protected by narrative armor, because even as analysts openly questioned whether the offense was fixed or just beating up on a bad Raiders team, the assumption never shifted that Philly would handle Washington and clinch the NFC East, and that tells you the leash is long for certain teams and brutally short for others. The repeated emphasis on being under center, play action, and confidence wasn't about scheme curiosity, it was about reassurance. Reassurance that the Eagles still look like what people want them to be. And the moment someone sarcastically asked whether Hurts or the Eagles actually played well against the Raiders, it revealed the uncomfortable reality that no one wanted to confront directly. The criticism was allowed, but only in a controlled way that never threatened the final conclusion. Compare that to how New England was discussed, because when the Patriots came up, the tone shifted from analytical to judgmental almost instantly. That 21-point collapse wasn't framed as a bad loss, it was called a choke, the worst in franchise history. And suddenly this wasn't about X's and O's, it was about toughness, identity, and whether this team is real at all. That contrast matters because it shows how ESPN's predictions aren't just football opinions, they're power rankings of belief. The Ravens conversation took full advantage of that vulnerability because Baltimore wasn't treated like a flawed team fighting for consistency, they were treated like a threat waiting to awaken. And the matchup with New England became less about whether the Ravens could win and more about whether the Patriots could survive. The focus on Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson's speed, and the Patriots' collapsing run defense wasn't subtle, it was a blueprint for domination. And when you hear analysts talk about controlling the game on the ground and building confidence, what they're really saying is that New England is positioned to be physically overwhelmed. Even when the picks were split, the language leaned toward Baltimore imposing its will, and that's why the phrase Ravens crush Pats doesn't feel exaggerated when you listen closely to how the game was framed. New England was being tested, Baltimore was being unleashed, and that difference fuels outrage among fans who feel like respect is handed out unevenly. Then you get to Jaguars versus Broncos, and this is where the prediction really set people off, because calling a Jaguars win a stun says more about perception than performance. The analysts openly acknowledge that Trevor Lawrence has been on a heater, that the offense has been efficient, quick, and confident, yet Jacksonville was still treated like a team nobody fully trusts. The excitement around this matchup wasn't about Jacksonville proving who they are. It was about Denver being challenged to justify their recent success. That's a subtle but powerful narrative shift, because even as the Jaguars' strengths were outlined, play action, quick throws, Travis Etienne as a pass catcher, the conversation kept circling back to whether Jacksonville knows who it is, especially in the run game. Meanwhile, Bo Nix and the Broncos were framed as confident, physical, and dangerous, which sets up the upset storyline perfectly. When analysts say they hate that they're picking Denver but can't quit them, and then still acknowledge how close this game actually is, you can hear the tension between data and belief. Calling a Jaguars win a stun isn't about the matchup, it's about reputation lagging behind reality, and that's what fans reacted to so strongly. Across all these games, the most controversial element wasn't any single quote, it was the pattern. Certain teams were allowed to struggle without consequence. Others were one bad half away from existential crisis. The Eagles could question themselves and still be crowned. The Patriots were one collapse away from being exposed. The Ravens were portrayed as inevitable if conditions were right, and the Jaguars were talented but still treated like guests at a party they might not belong to. Even the Bears and Packers discussion followed this logic, where history and narrative weighed as heavily as current form, and aggression, ownership, and streaks were invoked almost like destiny. When analysts talked about Matt LaFleur owning the Bears, it wasn't analysis, it was inheritance. And when they talked about Chicago needing to be the bully, it revealed how rare belief actually is for certain franchises. This entire Week 16 prediction segment became controversial because it stripped away the illusion of neutrality. The confidence, sarcasm, and certainty told viewers exactly who is trusted and who is tolerated. Repeatedly returning to how bad the Raiders are, how young the Patriots are, how inconsistent Jacksonville feels. Those weren't throwaway lines, they were narrative anchors. And as the strongest claims resurfaced, Eagles control, Ravens dominance, Jaguars doubt, the tension only grew, because fans could hear their teams being boxed into identities they've been fighting all season to escape. That's why this blew up, because predictions didn't just forecast outcomes, they defined reputations. And when reputation starts dictating expectation, every snap in Week 16 suddenly feels like a referendum.